everybody. This is Rick Overton. You're listening to Overview. And I'm going to dive right in with my guest. Peter Joseph is a man whose work I admired for a long time before having met him. And he is the creator of Zeitgeist, a series of films now that deconstruct the actual etymology behind the sources of religious myth and the actual roots behind the economic crises, synthetic as often as they are. He explains why. He's a brilliant man. He's also an artist. He's a musician and a composer. And I believe that the Renaissance occurs when you force a dark age on people. And we live in a very brightly lit dark age right now. And as bad as you think you are, and as tough as you think you are, with all your money, you're not bigger and badder than physics. And when you push a lot of dark on people, you're going to create light manufacturers. And that's what a Renaissance is. I don't wait for light, I manufacture it. And I only did that because of a necessity that you forced upon me when you brought the Dark Age. So I want to thank everyone who was forcing the Dark Age on us to manufacture, out of evolution's terms, people like my guest, Peter Joseph. Thanks for coming on the show.
Oh, thank you, Rick. I couldn't agree more. It's an ebb and flow of positive and negative, of darkness and light, and without the trials and tribulations, there wouldn't be any progress. So you got to take it all as natural. As much as we want to come down on everything, it's all natural, one way or another.
In the grander scheme of things, you know, I mean, the giraffe never would have been a giraffe if the fruit was always right here.
That's right. That's right.
And so you...
It's causality is an interesting subject, and that's probably the core of all the work that I've done over the years, is to figure out where the source of things rest, where the source of religion rests, where the source of our weird assumptions and behaviors, you know, as far as these kind of class relationships that we've concocted for ourselves, xenophobia, sexism, racism, all of these things have kernels in our social development, which have spawned in different ways, often forgetting where the sources are. So, you know, we could talk about religion, we could talk about economics. My biggest issue is trying to get people to understand that we have a traditionalized notion that is pushed forward, creating this quote-unquote modern view of reality that isn't modern whatsoever. It's just an archaic worldview that's been superimposed on what is becoming an advanced technological information-based society, and the two are in a complete clash now, and that's the big dichotomy of thought that's happening across the world. What do you believe anymore? Do you follow the traditional notions put forward by our early economists and tell us how to believe, how to think, these utilitarian notions of we're all just greedy and all of these things that are pushed forward on us, the religious notions of separation and superiority and inferiority and all these judgmental elements that are there? Do we keep that stuff?
Royalty's many masks.
Right.
Where your last name, your bloodline somehow means you get more supplies than the others in the village.
That's right, and that's been a core attribute of justification of the abuse of humanity by a very small portion of them for a very, very long time.
The data age seems to be messing with it, that paradigm, because if information is of value and we're all getting it at once, that's messing things up for people that just want the data for them and not getting it out to everyone at once.
Right. We often forget, back in the Middle Ages, people didn't read. Literacy was very low in Europe, so it was very easy to control people by describing the Bible, very perverse interpretations, in fact, that evolved over time. And then you had the age of general literacy, where you get one newspaper in the early 20th century. One newspaper at your door told you everything about the world. Everything. So you could see, again, how easy it was to control thought back then. Now it's almost the opposite. In fact, it kind of goes almost to a negative point because there's so much information. It's an oversaturation point, which, granted, we wouldn't want it any other way, really. Somehow information that's viable needs to come to the surface, which it does, but it's been flooded by all this nonsense simultaneously that keeps this problem basically in line. Where do we find our sources? It comes down to how we think about things. How do we evaluate information? How do we decide what's valuable, what isn't? Do we base it on our traditionalized notions, going back to that just stuff I mentioned earlier?
Yeah.
Or do we try to be objective and scientific? I can't emphasize that word enough, which is the rigor of forcing ourselves to accept the possibility that we're wrong, which is unfortunately so deeply ingrained in us to have this emotional reaction to be wrong. I hate that.
Well, it used to be your merit was what you built, what you made, what you hunted, what you killed, how many soldiers you laid to waste in a field. None of those things really play into the average modern fella's day-to-day stomp around life. And so he's wondering, what's the last thing I got that is my merit, my manhood? It's what I say. I decide things well based on data I've been fed. And all I can hope when I get in the car and no one's looking is that I got fed the right data.
That's right.
And
That's
these
right.
are most everything we're talking about is data wars.
Exactly. What are we? What are we as people? In some sense, we are just kind of conduits of the manifestation of information. I call it the organism of knowledge because it's completely independent of any of us. It's like we talk about authority. We talk about some guy invents this, and Newton discovers the law of gravity. Not really. He just stumbled upon it, just like every other invention. None of this stuff comes from anybody.
Ben Franklin invented electricity.
Right. That's a whole other subject of deep theft, but we won't go on that tangent. The parasitic culture is alive and well, and it's unfortunate how time moves forward and it gets buried over. But the real fault is, as far as ego, to separate that, the real fault is how people claim it's theirs, which is a huge, unfortunate reality. None of us have invented or come up with anything original ever.
The Western way is you get a plaque on a door.
Right.
Because you were the final guy someone went to for the answers. And all your grant money flows to your wing of a building.
Right.
And the last thing you want to see when you're a quantum theorist is the kid with string theory shows up, because on one level you're the noble scientist staring skyward and knowing that no matter what happens I remove myself from the equation and science is greater than me. And then you get on the phone and you hear that there's bills and the kid's not making it through college, and suddenly all that stuff goes out the window and you're just trying to figure out how you can keep your name slid into that thing on your door, and your oak door in your office,
right.
And you'll throw away science's latest discovery to keep your job.
Yep. I call that establishment paralysis.
I love that.
Because you're establishing your identity, you're making it firm, you're putting this authority behind it. Because it has a monetary quality, you have to use it for survival, and that's one of the greatest things I argue in the Zeitgeist movement stuff is that we have this whole basis of thought around institutions when there's really no such thing as an institution. Everything's emergent and transient. The very idea of having a solid institution, the state, or this entity of academia in whatever field, these notions are very paralyzing and retarding ultimately, because it's always a fluid motion of change. But we stop that change, and that's why the corporate establishment, with all of its different tactics of planned obsolescence and the stifling of progress. There's a light bulb in a firehouse in the Midwest that's been burning for over 100 years, made out of a unique technology that no one can figure out. And it's been suppressed, basically. All the patents were destroyed. All the information, was destroyed.
But it's screwed in and just sitting there.
It's been on for over 100 years. I mean, this is it's like a testament to the type of progress we could have with technological application if we didn't have the hindrance of everyone seeking profit and turnover and gain constantly, which stifles all progress across the board.
There's a glitch in our hard drive, our mental hard drive, and it is, especially the way the structure is set up, it is possible to woo the mind, to woo it with things. And that was, I think, the Spirit Master's earliest warnings is, it's just we have a glitch in our wiring, and if I offer you too much, some part of your humanity goes click, shuts off, and your brain will reattach all those things to the stuff that you used to value your friends with. We'll pull it from them. And then once you start having things, you immediately must start running the mistrust software on top of it that makes you doubt why your friends still hang with you. And that's only based on your own self-contempt, because you know how fraudulently you got all that. and so, but now you're realizing, you're thinking, you're whispering to yourself in your own inner mental ear, well, they can't be with you for you anymore. So everyone must be using you for your other stuff. I got to get rid of them until I have nothing but stuff, and I have no feedback because no one will say no to me because of all the power I have, and they just want to be near my stuff. And that's the day I never hear an honest thing ever again.
That's a brilliant point. I can't even think of how many tangents I could go off on what you just brought up.
Go, baby. Well, that's what this is about.
Well, it's like here's one point. We have the entire system rewards the worst elements of behavior. So we can talk about human nature, flaws in our wiring, but the very fact that the system is going after the most selfish notions, rewarding the most selfish notions, putting points of success in our mind, that being a billionaire, which completely is about as offensive as you can get. And a billionaire is sitting there hoarding in their personal account billions of dollars that has true capital utility that could solve tons of problems, but they hoard it for status. Complete waste of the concept of capital that has been put forward by every early economist, not to say it's vindicated as far as those theories, but this is not what they thought would happen when they thought about the installation of this economic structure. So there's everything that goes against the grain. If you want to be altruistic, for example, when I made my first film, no intention of being a filmmaker. I was a musician, no intention of selling anything. I was just a guy who made a performance art piece that I performed in Lower Manhattan, had a free performance for 6 nights, big vaudevillian type deal. A bunch of people came.
Projection screens. It
was a lot of fun. It was a catharsis for me. I was working in advertising. I just couldn't handle it anymore, so I did this for my own little catharsis. And it got really popular once it was thrown online. Boom, piracy. Everything started to spark out. Meaning that the moment I put it up for free, the moment I said, I'm not going to do anything with this because I had no intention, I had no idea it would go anywhere else as well. I mean, I can explain this in more detail as to how I started to move into filmmaking. And then, of course, since I have to have a profession.
I want to know about this.
Since I have to have a profession, I was like, okay, well, since I worked in advertising as film music composer, I'm going to move into this and just do what I can. But I always keep the ethic of putting things out for free. That's my point. And that has been so abused more than anything else. I'm just astounded by people that have taken probably, I bet $1 million has been generated through piracy, if not much more than that.
On your project.
It's all because I allowed this free distribution. So here's the point.
Well, you're going to get bugs at every picnic, but they're helping you in a weird way by spreading it further.
No, see, that's not the point of spreading it, and the loss of money isn't the issue. Right. It's the abuse. Yeah. And the fact that if you try to be nice, you try to be altruistic, you are a target for parasitic abuse. So everything from Gandhi to Mother Teresa, all these things that we sort of think are great, Martin Luther King, there's these social emphasis that everyone holds up and they're, yeah. All of that stuff is intrinsically, diametrically opposed to the value systems put forward by the system.
But you have to be realistic about the fact of what field you're playing on. It's the reason they are the reason you have to make it. They become the part of the dynamic of why the necessity for this is to be done at all.
True.
Is because of this other element. This won't magically go away.
Sure.
And you have to leave things out to be stolen.
Sure.
A lot of it is designed to be. It's like an apple is just an outer sugar coating transportation system for seeds that then get evacuated from an animal that walks some distance from that tree. That's all the fruit is.
Right.
And I think sometimes the candy coating we leave on things are just the dispersal systems to have it pop somewhere later elsewhere.
Well, back to our original point, everything's natural. Everything is a form of progress. I completely agree with that. But I guess my core emphasis is I wish we could develop a social, not an ethic or moral disposition, but a system that actually rewards human altruism and human giving. These qualities that we supposedly think, are our deepest, association, yet not rewarded whatsoever. This is what I look forward to in the future when we sort of understand what a society means, what it means to live together, what it means to relate to the habitat. All the science calculates us to this specific point where to live in harmony is the ultimate, and I don't mean that poetically, I mean that in a firmly scientific relationship.
It's going to be because of things you're doing. Evolution is ghastly up close.
Sure.
It's brutal up close, and it just looks smooth and pretty in an ascending posture graph. But up close, there's all these things that miss the mark on all the mistries and accidents, and we're at your hand. It is the most graceful evolutionary transition for a consciousness leap I have ever seen, because you adorn it with the art you have been bringing forth with music and graphics and things like that, and you make this uneasy concept candy coated. You sugar coat it with a thing that we can swallow this and open it up later, and it starts conversation. That's, I think, part of the testament, tribute to its actual many qualities.
Well, I appreciate that. That's the whole point of, as you know very much in your work in communication. It's all about communication. How do you get stuff across? And that's the ultimate arduousness of it all. Is how do I? That's why I like Culture in Decline. The other show I have is it's a comedy-based satire.
Yeah.
So I'm taking the exact serious notions and trying to twist them in a way that could be absorbed by people that might be a little more existential. Might be the kind of group of people like a George Carlin quality, where they kind of just choose to laugh at society, which I think is viable. But but keeping some motivation for people to want to see change, and that's the core driving ethic, and all the art and stuff, and pretty much everything I do, from the media festival that you've been so great to be a part of every year.
I was honored to be a performer on your shows, and I'm at your disposal whenever you need me.
Well, we have
just
the third.
want to be on deck, for this phenomenon. It was Woodstock at one time that was the giant meet and greet. And since then, it has gone to Occupy and other things. And another giant place that Woodstock went for a future generation is to Zeitgeist. It's that kind of person would also have attended Woodstock.
I think you're probably right. You're probably right. So, people are looking. They're searching very much for answers with what's happening in the world today. So all we can do is hope to try to get some inspiration in there and start to pave the way. It's dire to think about what's in store as the conflicts of this traditionalism I mentioned earlier, this jingoistic, religious, dogmatic. I say religious in the broad scheme, not necessarily traditional religion. The economic system is a religion. It's a religious notion.
The worship of the dollar is vastly overpowers all other worship of other things demographically here.
Right. And the clash, as I mentioned, but with the new information age, this new realization, this new awareness of our environment, these new science fields, the merging of scientific knowledge, bam, we're talking evolution. This is the great rumble, I think, in the lifetime that we're living in, more so than any other period. It's a unique period to be alive, I think.
Data receival. And what is the one thing? We're standing up straight, tail gone,
Yeah.
thumbs are overworked. So what's the only other thing that man needs to evolve? It's the thing he uses 10% of.
That's right.
And what is the only way you can evolve it? Get more data sooner. So it's interesting that Timothy Leary was calling this ages ago, that this is going to transform things in a way that almost no one knows what to do about. And they're going to try and control the data on there, but they just simply won't be able to because of commerce.
Yeah, that's an excellent
You can't
point
shut down
too.
the other people saying, we want to shut it down because of this info. No, we sell things on here, and we're more powerful than you because of that,
Right.
and we're not going to let you shut it down anymore.
Right.
And it's holding up the whole the iron fist on it's being held up by commerce. And it's funny, capitalism is biting the capitalists in the ass.
Guess that was expected, though, because it's such a self-destructing mechanism in and of itself. But you're absolutely right. That's the thing that people forget. They argue human nature all the time again, and they don't realize that we've done our physical evolution for quite a period. Now it's the mental evolution. It happens very rapidly. Cultural evolution can happen extremely rapidly, which is what gives us so much hope, because these brains are extremely powerful. We can make very, very aware decisions, or we can be suppressed and make very base, primitive decisions. It all comes down to the environmental condition,
The numbing media has done its job.
Oh, yeah.
But that kind of lie can't hold forever. And artists poking fun at the media have done them, I think, quite proper immeasurable damage.
Yes.
And they're still not totally recovered from it. The last thing they wanted was a parody of them
True.
to be what defines them, and most of the people see them as a stuffed lying shirt now.
Yeah.
So that's a huge leap to see that. Almost don't trust any news person. And if someone says to me, does that include MSNBC? I say, fine, take it with you. As long as you apply that rule to the other ones, you'll be all right.
Yeah. Yeah.
Even though I love MSNBC, and I have, not all of NBC, Morning Joe, I could live without and all that. But I mean, they're trying in my eye. But I say if you had to let that one go to let go of the other larger system, I'd live with that.
Right. Yeah, objective reporting is so polluted by the advertising basis of sponsorship that happens with these networks. That's a huge problem. That's why the internet media world has become so powerful simultaneously, and is the saving grace of media. I just can't wait for the turning point where you already see this. The statistics are dropping substantially in most television programs, moving slowly to the internet. It's a truly powerful phenomenon. Now it's just an issue of really harnessing and bringing to the forefront those shows and those representations that really hold the truth well. And that's the problem, though. As I mentioned earlier, it's like this just oversaturation. I mean, I have people send me stuff all day, and I don't have time to go through all of it. It's just unbelievable the amount of data out there. There's not enough time in the day to go through all the independent stuff, this is something that I don't know the answer to, but I bring it up because I think it's something people need to consider. We've gone to the other side. There's so much information. It's just almost out of control. And I mean information in the sense of opinion. Like the opinions fly. And that's something that is great, again, but it's hard to narrow it. And I wish the mainstream, as we call it, really did their job properly, because we do need, at some point, a funnel to take the most relevant stuff, not what the networks and their economically driven, politically bought yes men want to show the public, but actual relevant stuff. And that is something that's really important for the sake of the global consciousness. We're so detached and apart now because everyone's going in different directions in so many complex ways. I think that's somewhat problematic.
A growth phase.
Yeah.
It's like a teenager starting. We were children, but then the individuation gene kicks in and it turns the kid into an asshole, so that the parents will kick him out of the nest and he'll start to learn to fly and spread the genetic material around. That's the whole routine with a jerk teenager. Yeah. Nature's making him peck at the shell. And I think we as a species are pecking at the shell of our childhood in the media and that thing that raised us, and we're starting to see this isn't a parent, it's a step-parent with a lot of problems.
Right.
And it's poisoned us a little bit, and we have to shake some of that abuse off. We are abuse victims. We're cultural abuse victims.
Oh, that's an understatement. That's an understatement.
And we're traumatized by it. And you can see it all the time.
Sure. There's the public health issue, psychological, physiological. There's a super distortion occurring in modern society. We think about progress, our lifespans are extending, all of this, but quality of life, centered psychology has become really, really bad.
Very true.
I mean, obviously everyone has been talking about all these mass shootings around the United States for a while, which started in the 80s with the whole postal thing, you remember. And of course, there's copycat stuff, and there's a weird thing that happens culturally with people that are broken for many different reasons. And this pattern has gotten really rampant. In fact, I remember hearing a George Carlin routine like a decade ago, where he's like, "You just wait; it's going to happen in church." And within 2 years, there were shootings happening, mass shootings in church.
He nailed everything, man.
And the
core prophetic.
And the question is, where does that come from? Because obviously all the pundits now want to talk about guns and all these things, as though that has anything to do with the distortion of thought that happens within the human being. And the real issue is this dehumanization. I can't emphasize that word enough.
Absolutely.
The whole society is being dehumanized with this rhetoric. And they don't seem, the controllers, if you want to call them that, don't understand how much danger they're creating to themselves.
Do they? Oh, well.
By these patterns. Now, that's a debatable subject, because you can go on causality as far as warfare, the need for destabilization, the need to have more security. That's why you destabilize other countries. So that's a whole other subject.
I just think anything that is the sort of treacherous star point down manipulation kind of thing, it has its turn, and then no matter what, it eats itself. I think I think Spielberg's War of the Worlds was a winking cautionary tale about them. If you'll notice, when the Martian war machine breaks out of the pavement in Queens, what shape is it? It's a triangle with a big eye in it. Right. It knocks a church over, crushes a gas station, and then just starts incinerating people. And you can fight it all you want. There's no point to fighting it. You just outrun it. Why? It is designed so that level of it cannot maintain for long, and it just eats itself and drops dead. And that's what happened. You don't fight them, you outrun them, and they fall dead.
That's a good metaphor. That's a good metaphor.
And I'm wondering how much of that plays into this, and can you fight them? Because when you do leave them alone, they're designed to fight, and you don't fight back. They turn on each other.
Right.
Because they have to fight something.
Right.
And then you'll leave him alone in a room, he just crushes the mirror.
Right. Right. The trick is this obsession with fight in general, because that's not the solution. People want to fight everything, as though that doesn't perpetuate the exact same problem. Back to the dehumanization point.
I'm sorry. Go ahead.
This is all within the same line of conversation. I read a quote recently. Someone sent me. It was brilliant. I can't remember it right now, but basically, to paraphrase it, it said, even when you encounter someone of an extremely negative quality that's very against you, treat them nice, because you have no idea how deep their problems might rest. I was, for example, in the airport recently, and there was a TSA guy being really rude to everybody, and I said to him very subtly, I was like, you better be careful. You have no idea how people might react that don't have the patience you assume they do for your behavior, because all it takes is that one final thing. In this type of pressurized system where everyone's forced, they're back against the wall, they're in debt, they're broke, all it takes, and we see it now, this explosion happening, it's almost a trend. All it takes is one nuance of someone to be rude to someone else, and that triggers their entire life experience in an explosion. Now they're not.
And everyone has a camera. Yeah. There's no one without one.
That's true. That adds a whole new level of entertainment to it.
You're going to be famous, dude. You're going to be famous for whatever you did next.
Yeah.
Virally famous. You better watch your stuff, because that ain't Big Brother. That's Little Brother, baby.
Right. Yeah, that's a whole other reality, a whole other interest.
On a level of research, I don't know anyone who's done the research you've done on how history has come to the fore and locked its roots in the theft of other myths and things. The Mithrin myth, is that where they got the word myth? I have to imagine that's where the word came from.
I'm not sure about that, but
the history going right back to its dynamic mechanics, rather than any you don't talk in terms of legend. You talk in terms of just what's carved in and what they deciphered and read.
I try. I mean, that's a bold categorization. I wish we really understood history as much as we should, since the Great Library of Alexandria was destroyed. I mean, there's been because of back to this establishment paralysis, this thing that's happened with these institutions that emerge that want to maintain their integrity, their financial status, their power status, has completely stifled and destroyed so much data throughout thousands of years. And Carl Sagan had a great quote in his series Cosmos. He said, it was as though when they destroyed the Library of Alexandria, it was as though the entire culture had a lobotomy, and everyone forgot everything that they sourced to their origination. Excuse me, and that's a really great way to think about it. If you think about knowledge in the group mind as a group transference, if you can destroy where people know, their sense of origin of all the things that they talk about, the roots of words. There's so many weird things in words that we use. I've heard you talk about that at length. Yeah. The origin of,
when you say Amen at the end of a prayer.
Sure, there's
Amen Ray.
Religion is the ultimate bridge.
It's totally sun worship, stolen stuff.
It's ridiculous. And the sad thing about it all is that the original concept is really obvious. The original natural worship, where you're actually looking at nature, you see big waves in the ocean, Poseidon, you see the sun, Horus, Osiris, Zeus, lightning, all of the things that in early Egyptian and Greek mythology is really quite beautiful, because they're recognizing different phenomena. They didn't understand it, they didn't know how to place it, so they gave them categorizations of thought and attributed a spiritual quality to them. I think that's pretty beautiful and poetic, because none of them really took it seriously. Not as seriously as your Judeo-Christian Islamic cults take them today.
Right.
They've taken all the religious notions taken from nature, and at some point, because the establishments need to preserve control, they started to hybrid them all together, and then to turn certain things into reality that were only poetry. So the Jesus character, all the Old Testament stuff, all of that is symbolic poetry. To think that any of these characters actually existed in the extent that they did, some of them might have been semi-historical, meaning they're loosely based. That's very common throughout mythology. There's always like one character. In fact, there's a great Egyptologist called Gerald Massey, who wrote Egypt, Light of the World, in this massive 3-volume set. A brilliant poet / Egyptologist. I emphasize poet, because he understood the poetry in a way that no one else prior to him could. Once they had a Rosetta Stone, once started to figure out hieroglyphics, he went in with these other very well-established Egyptologists and suddenly realized that this entire basis of the Judeo-Christian theology was taken and twisted from the early, basically Egyptian, and in some effect Greek, and then some other Eastern religions that were all hybrided. Why the establishment?
So it was literally poetic license.
Yes, yes, absolutely. And why? Because the establishment needs to preserve ideology to keep a society under control. So Rome takes all the pagan religions, throws them together, mutates this thing into the canonical gospel notion that we have today, really distorts all interpretations, throws out the Gnostic gospels because they don't obviously fit, even though those have more truth to them as far as the poetry than the canonical gospels do. And then they harnessed it all together to make one religion that, in ideology, just like economy, if you have one group of people believing the exact same thing, they're very easy to control. And that has been a staple of social control since day one.
For thousands of years. Yeah. There was a day one previous to those days when people were supposedly treating each other better, but
hard to say. I mean, if you go back to pre-class society, at least in the pre-Neolithic era, we didn't have the impression of industry, of control. Everything was at the disposal.
There was an alpha in each tribe.
Oh,
There was some manner of control somewhere.
Sure.
And I think everything is probably some sort of skewed extension on the alpha monkey thing.
Well, you go back to baboon culture. They have firm hierarchies and very predictable dominance hierarchies. But I'm
more of a bonobo.
Yeah, that's good. That's good. Well, that goes to show that even between species, there's different behaviors. Competitive, whereas the bonobo, there's more of a sexual and gestural relationship.
Nature works that dynamic out for the same sets of reasons. The bonobo's the negotiator.
Right.
And it has a much more evolved understanding of how to keep itself and its community safe.
Right. Social evolution, if you take a really broad view, what organisms will be here long after we and all mammals are gone? Probably ants. Ants and some other similar insects. Why? Because ants are little social machines. They operate in these enormous masses only with the social intent. They always seek to help and preserve their group identity. And that's if there's anything that would show evolutionary fitness, forget the individuality of the human being. Let's just narrow it down.
You commie, you socialist.
We're just gonna be like ants.
I'm an individual ant. I'm that one that got lost on the sink and is just walking back and forth looking where the guys are. Yeah. Lost the track of the scent.
Ants would never develop nuclear weapons. Ants wouldn't even ponder the idea of a nuclear weapon. That would just be too crazy for them to even consider, because it goes against anything that would denote long-term evolutionary fitness of the species. So our brains...
Unless they were red ants.
Yeah. Nice. So it's fascinating.
Oh, well, that's... Once again, you have a laser pointer of clarity that you cut through all the dogma and just point out a piece of physics, a piece of human dynamic physics in an eloquent and brilliant way. I think that is its own. You'll be remembered as a great teacher, and art. You're going to help make art the way things get taught again, because that used to be the way it was done. It's very tribal.
Sure,
to teach through art.
Oh, art is the seed of scientific inquiry. Art is the seed of intellectual hypotheses. You have to use that experimental element that's inherent to art. It's unfortunate. I mean, what's the first thing that the state does when they're running out of money? They cut all arts programs.
That was imaginative kids that stopped a war and fired a president 40 years ago.
Right.
Those were kids educated and given liberal arts permission to think differently,
right,
and all this stuff. And the other half of you, we're just going to throw into a fireplace and burn to use up as just delivery systems for our equipment.
Right.
And so that's a wake-up call right there. I was around for that phase.
Sure.
So I remember the elements and the sexuality.
Right.
And that part isn't as prevalent now in the liberal movement as it was, and it was one of the reasons there were so many hippies. It was greasers combing their hair forward again because they thought they might get laid in the village with a hippie chick, and though that sounds like a pretty base reason to do anything liberal, it slowly got through that thick skull a lot of stuff while he's talking with her.
Hence persuasion.
It was one of the great persuasion things, absent in the movement now.
Sure.
It stands purely on its morality in a pretty icy, amoral time,
Well, other forms of persuasion similar can come forward. Hence, again, that, like, for example, in March we have our Zeitgeist Day. I remember last year you did a little thing for our Zeitgeist Day event.
And you have a lot of beautiful women running around Zeitgeist, too, I gotta say.
That is a positive.
The point I'm making is you are kind of bringing a hint and a wink of that kind of human freedom back in there, too, a little bit, I see.
But, yeah,
just in attendance to the event,
Well, my point being is that we had that intellectual day that you were part of last year. I remember you did something very briefly. Big intellectual day. The main event was in Vancouver. Then we had the arts and fun day. It's parallel. The March is the intellectual day, and then in August, the media festival, we had this dyad between intellect and fun. Both of them really go together, whether people realize it or not. Totally. And that's the beauty of it. So the persuasion.
Einstein was a giant kid.
Sure. Oh yeah, he was absolutely. All great thinkers and inventors have a very youthful quality to them. You'll find.
Yeah,
and they're always artistically inclined too. The greatest artists, the greatest scientific minds, always had artistic interests on the side. Einstein, the violin.
Bucky.
Yep, absolutely. Ray Kurzweil's a musician. You know, there's all sorts of there's a feedback that happens with that experimental vulnerability that keeps people open.
The kid is the only one who's still got a dream.
Sure.
You know, the rest of the grown-up just repeats now.
I know, the kid's systematically destroyed as time goes over by the established institutions, and all that creativity is ripped out of them.
They try, unless you go to the arts.
Yeah.
Unless you honor the right half of your head.
I was very fortunate, as a quick point of history, to go into an arts college in the 8th grade of my education.
Where?
It was called the North Carolina School of the Arts. It's now the University of North Carolina.
No, I was separate then. Yeah.
Yeah, and I look back at it and I'm so happy I had that opportunity, because if I went through the general high school kind of environment, I could turn it out very, very differently. I was very vulnerable to be in that, very fortunate to be in that position at that point of vulnerability, and that really paved the way. So I'm a big advocate of getting kids into this state of vulnerability with really open thought, just as open as possible, as possible. But kids are ultimately the beginning of everything. People forget that the things that happen to you as a child hold strong for the rest of your life. And you can see a lot of the distortion in people by the early things that happen. My third film, Zeitgeist Moving Forward, has a whole section, 45 minutes, all on human behavior and human nature stuff.
And the etymology of that.
Yeah.
Tracking these traits down. It's my favorite thing. You make it so clear and undeniable to a logical mind that, because the logical mind knows looking for the flaw.
Right.
And instead of looking for the flaw in what you're saying, you're pointing the flaw out in a way that my mind just has to go, yes, that supersedes everything else. Its clarity is what another generation needs to see, because they are on TV being stupidified.
Yeah. Well,
idiocracy style. It's intentional. You don't make as much trouble when you're a dope. You don't know how.
Yep.
And it's the arts that have held up the torch in the tunnel.
Yeah, and the ultimate fusion of knowledge too, which is really important. If you go back, 80 years, you had biology and sociology and physics and mathematics. Now,
everything with a cork divider between it.
Yeah, and now all that stuff has come together. Everyone's realizing you can't even think about physics without thinking about psychology, because the people that are engaging in the act of understanding physics and the processes of calculation are very biased, because we humans unfortunately have this bias problem, which is further ingrained by our culture.
That's that plaque in the door, and that's just because the universe ends where you get paid or your brain is exhausted.
Right.
We always stick the flag. Just say it ends here. I got to sit down.
Yeah. Yep. Yeah, it's fascinating. It's fascinating to see how much more productive and progressive we could be as a species if we just changed our mind and saw what was possible.
It's never an issue of not asking questions. It's just, let's get past these ones.
Yeah.
Let's go to the better questions. The question is the only thing that matters. An answer changes as you're saying it. What time is it? It's 5:54. It's 5:54. It's 5:56. You can't even say it accurately, and the only thing that lasts is the question.
Right. Yep.
And curiosity. And curiosity is the other thing being stomped out like a cigarette right now.
Absolutely. The entire educational system is based on an early 20th century industrial approach to human labor. It's not even designed to create inspiration of thought.
Yeah, right.
It's not creative at all. It's there to make people to just be able to function in this utilitarian way to fit industry, and that's it. That's all. There's so many ways.
It follows religion very closely in that I say it to you and you say it back. To me, the big difference between religion and spirituality, because I think of myself as more of a spiritual explorer, and religion is, I tell you what God is, that's it. You don't bother looking anymore. And spirituality is, you get it right or wrong for the rest of your life, and you probably die not knowing for sure. But you had an interesting exploration your whole life.
Yeah. Yeah, I think that's a great way to look at it. Absolutely. For example, if you were to go back and think about the core relationships of the human being, and these are spiritual relationships. To me, spirituality means a relationship. It means relationship in general, actually. How do you fit in whatever you think you're in?
Right.
And how do you relate to it, behave, and interact with it? And when you think about the core spiritual relationship, which is to me a physical science relationship, the first thing that kids should get, education-wise, is familiarity with the land that feeds them. You get kids in the dirt to learn how to grow, to understand the physics over time of how things grow, not just your rudimentary physical science class, but if they really get into it, the aesthetic of it comes to them. There's one thing I thought about recently to extend this point. We have so much value distortion in the culture. Everyone's been so twisted by greed and these assumptions of success. They have no idea what everyone's obsessed with, this idea of freedom. I'm getting so sick of this word, freedom, as though we have any, as though we're not rigidly bound by the laws of nature. And that's what's lost, because no one's thinking about carrying capacity. No one's thinking about efficiency, waste reduction as far as economy. The first thing I thought about this in the hypothetical of it is if you took every human right now on the earth and you put them on a tiny island, maybe the size of this room, that had a limited amount of sustenance, but enough to keep them alive. And it required them to understand through their own intuition, interaction with the environment, something that anyone of a general average IQ could do. And they learned to cultivate around this. They would learn so many things they do not learn in the world today. They would learn how to respect the limits of what happens around them. They would develop a value system that would be associated with those limits, and therefore all of their sense of want and acquisition would subside to fit in this context by default. There would be no way to think beyond it, as opposed
it's like permaculture thinking.
Well, it's sure. Permaculture by its very idea is just the most natural, basic
accepting conditions and rolling with it.
I just say it's scientifically causal. And then you take all those people from those little islands and you drop them back on the earth, and maybe you'd have a chance to get a value system that could be somewhat relevant. Because now the growth economy, all the growth notions, the acquisition notions, it's just everything is one distortion after another. So that's the thing I point out to people is let's put everyone on one little island. Maybe their value system would groom properly.
And we live in a world that you didn't make anything, and you feel kind of fraudulent for it as a rule.
Sure.
And all you do is have things that others made.
Right.
And all of that leads to self-contempt.
Yep.
We were designed to do an impression of God and create. And the further from that you go, the further you accumulate over create, and it just adds up as a mistake and fraudulence, but one that is rewarded and you don't know how to back out of the system. So you start burying your emotions with other crap, whether it's an addiction to a video game or whatever, and I think so many of the addictions are just paint over the rust of the sense of fraudulence over I'm not creating.
Yeah.
Because you ask anybody on a deathbed, what do you want to do? I want to write a song. I want to do music. I want to do something creative. And they never got to do it. So why is that the deathbed bucket list thing? Unless that is some salmon-like driving force that we've just had culturally buried on us.
Yeah. I think and if those people are lucky, they'll develop full-blown pathology, and they'll just forget about all those nuances of humanity. One thing I notice when people work in the establishment, people work in the establishment, they often, when they get older and they start to retire, for example, I know a tobacco lawyer. Imagine that. We're talking for the tobacco companies.
Hello.
And
what's his karma?
What's unique is now he does lots of pro bono work. Now he's giving. So his sense of reward, that's really the ultimate thing, is giving. The real value reward that everyone draws, you can go back to Margaret Mead, who really denoted this well, that everything people really like is volunteer. It's not based on personal gain. The satisfaction you might be able to attribute to some sort of narcissism, but I don't think that holds as much gravity as a lot of these utilitarian theorists of the early 20th century would want us to believe, Freudian type stuff. There's always the element of giving that people remember, not the billions of dollars you made being an asshole and ripping off people your whole life.
Yeah, it's the fraudulent stuff.
It's when you help that woman across the street.
That's once again a creative act.
Yeah, absolutely.
And creativity is on the track. I think creativity and spirituality are one and the same.
I couldn't argue with that.
You're following the process of chance taking and making something new, which is creativity's rule is it's not really creative if you copied it, put a twist on it. You don't have to make it completely new. Put your thing on it. Okay, now it's creative again. That's evolution. The thing just went dunk, jumped one half step up from where it was before. It's the same process that got us to stand up straight.
Exactly. Building upon knowledge, and this organism of knowledge that I call it, that's where the creative drive rests, in my view. And to facilitate that is going to take, for example, to break my train of thought here, imagine the type of creativity we could have in the world if we didn't have bound, excuse me, by all the proprietary and patent and hoarding of ideas that's inherent to this social model that we have, where everyone wants to protect.
That's rooted in they don't believe they're creative. They have to hoard because they can't make. Makers don't ever hoard because I go, no, take it. Why? I'll make another.
Oh, sure.
I make things.
I mean,
it's not even a problem.
Well, the big problem, though, but I completely agree with you. The big problem, though, is the monetary structure and the reward.
Yeah.
So if you invent this really nice microphone, right, and you're just like, well, I just want to give this to everyone, let them perfect it. But wait a minute, I have to make a living, so I'm going to patent this thing and make sure I can sell it for a long period of time.
That way.
And that's why it's stifling. So I imagine in the future, when we get rid of this economic system, we begin to share resources, the explosion of creativity will be so incomprehensible.
Oh, sure.
In complete difference to
No fear of it being suppressed.
no fear of being suppressed, and people gain reward from their contribution to it, not their name on it.
Right.
You know, the ego thing will be lost, and everyone will enjoy the fruits of amazing new culture once we get past this horribly narcissistic and truncated frame of reference that guides our values and our social system being a complete distortion of that. We just have to get over the hurdle, man.
Starfleet, make it so. I love Star Trek because at the core it said we got past this.
Right.
We didn't blow ourselves up before we could start doing that.
Right. Right.
And that's maybe the main thing I love about it.
Sure. Science fiction has a very good role. Speaking of creativity, there's lots of the history of science fiction, I think, serves a unique role in the way we open ourselves up. And again, it's really the art itself. But you go back to H.G. Wells, you go back to a lot of these guys. They were really brilliant in the things that they foreshadowed and the things that they hypothesized, usually in a social context, that they wouldn't come out to say it outright, But
Jules Verne certainly nailed an array of predictions: submarine,
Sure.
fax, helicopter.
Right.
And Herbert George Wells was the sort of more spiritual, more religious-based guy.
Sure.
He had a God morality thing at the end, and
Yeah.
God in his wisdom would do this, and he'd bend physics way past any explanation that Verne demanded to say a guy's invisible because of something he mixed,
Right.
It didn't have the nuts and bolts of launching a bullet from Florida to the moon.
Sure.
Not that was perfect either, lower back-wise. But, yes, we are going to launch you with a giant cannon. Is that safe? Oh, yes, we have cushioned seats.
It opens us up, though. I guess that's my point. They used to call people that want to go to the moon mooniacs, remember? You were just crazy if you thought you could get to the moon.
A lunatic.
Lunatic. Is that
A mooniac, yeah.
So so you extrapolate that. All the things that they say are impossible for us to do now, odds are every single one will be accomplished.
There's just one thing, and this is the monkey rule. The one thing the really old gorilla hates seeing is a teenage male gorilla. He just hates them because he knows. Tick-tock, baby.
Yeah.
And the same thing with a new idea.
Sure.
We're still scared mammals fighting over the heap of dung we sort of, stuck our flag in. And it's some of these rules go back so far. It's hard to shake its traits. What is a thing that works better than muse and art to knock an old, ugly evolutionary trait, off its high horse there?
Well, we just have to remember that everything that we believe is only believed because it's shared by the community at large.
Until someone tries to change that community.
Exactly.
And that's what you're doing.
That's what I'm trying. I realize
you're succeeding. You've succeeded beyond anyone's wildest imagination. And you can base it on fact. Looking back on it now, you can say, oh, yeah, that makes tons of sense. Oh, yes. When I first saw Zeitgeist, I was just blown away, and I didn't know how many people would take on. And then I watched the hit number just go off to the edge of the page.
Right.
And you addressed an answer with a series of new questions.
Sure.
And what you did was rewire our brain to look at it as a series of new questions that we go on asking after we click off your film. That is maybe the greatest gift you could have given us, even beyond this enormously valuable data, is you gave us a skill set.
Well, I appreciate that. I haven't thought about that angle, but that's a beautiful way to think about anything.
You structured it. It had to be viewed in that manner to be viewed.
Sure.
It's like you downloaded us the latest Office software so we could double click it and it wouldn't just be cluster font when we open it, because it's very complex what you show us.
Sure.
But it's done in such a beautiful way that it just downloads smoothly and opens in any format, any personality format. It's really a work of indelible genius and just good for mankind kind of stuff.
Well,
What's next?
So.
What are you going to make next? What's the next one?
Well, I have a new series, actually. So the Zeitgeist film series ended with the trilogy.
Right.
And then, of course, I have this bi-monthly web series, which, by the way,
I want to get you.
Man. I know. We'll have to bring you in.
A thing to do.
Absolutely. No, it's an open palette. It's one big experiment. That's Culture in Decline.
Yeah.
And then I have a new series I'm starting, which is actually live action. It's not documentary, at least not documentary in a traditional sense. There's a
scripted.
It's completely scripted. It's a fusion of. How to describe this in a short way without giving too much away? Yeah. It's a fusion of not a docudrama, but in short, I'm taking all the core attributes, historical reference that I talk about at length in all the materials in Zeitgeist, and I'm reassessing it all and putting it in the context of aesthetic, where the audience, by the end of this film, is going to look at the world in hindsight from this new elevated place I'm attempting to bring them to. Just like you look back at your life and said, I shouldn't have done that. I'm hoping that when they walk out of this film, they'll say, wow, I can't believe this stupid system we live in.
You present undeniable logic beautifully.
Well, thanks.
No, I thank you. You're a great teacher, and it's a real honor and a pleasure to know you. And will you come back for round 2 of this?
Oh, of course.
We got more to say, but we run an hour and we ran it. And so, my friend, I am indebted to you in ways, that over the years they will find their way to express. But
likewise, Rick, I really appreciate you bringing me on.
It's mutual, man. You're the best and brilliant. And what's some new music we can hear?
No new music at the moment. I'm actually trying to get the whole soundtrack done from the series and get that up online for free. Finally, these are things that are in the background. But the new media festival, I'm going to do a new musical project. You got to see the Zeitgeist Requiem for one. I did the first one.
It was beautiful.
Thank you. And I'm going to do another one. I'll do another probably an ensemble type work for the new one in August.
Look up Peter Joseph. Look up Zeitgeist. Learn about this. It's very important, perspective-shifting artwork that you will hold dear to you the rest of your life, and you'll be sharing, as I know I did. And so thank you for coming on, man. I look forward to our next one.
My pleasure.
Peter Joseph, thanks. This is Overview. Thanks for listening in, guys. Terms, people like my guest, Peter Joseph. Thanks for coming on the show.
Oh, thank you, Rick. I couldn't agree more. It's an ebb and flow of positive and negative, of darkness and light, and without the trials and tribulations, there wouldn't be any progress. So you got to take it all as natural. As much as we want to come down on everything, it's all natural, one way or another.
In the grander scheme of things, I mean, the giraffe never would have been a giraffe if the fruit was always right here.
That's right. That's right.
And so you.
It's causality is an interesting subject, and that's probably the core of all the work that I've done over the years, is to figure out where the source of things rest, where the source of religion rests, where the source of our weird assumptions and behaviors, as far as these kind of class relationships that we've concocted for ourselves, xenophobia, sexism, racism, all of these things have kernels in our social development, which have spawned in different ways, often forgetting where the sources are. So, we could talk about religion, we could talk about economics. My biggest issue is trying to get people to understand that we have a traditionalized notion that is pushed forward, creating this quote-unquote modern view of reality that isn't modern whatsoever. It's just an archaic worldview that's been superimposed on what is becoming an advanced technological information-based society, and the two are in a complete clash now, and that's the big dichotomy of thought that's happening across the world. What do you believe anymore? Do you follow the traditional notions put forward by our early economists and tell us how to believe, how to think, these utilitarian notions of we're all just greedy and all of these things that are pushed forward on us, the religious notions of separation and superiority and inferiority and all these judgmental elements that are there? Do we keep that stuff?
Royalty's many masks.
Right.
Where your last name, your bloodline somehow means you get more supplies than the others in the village.
That's right, and that's been a core attribute of justification of the abuse of humanity by a very small portion of them for a very, very long time.
the data age seems to be messing with it, that paradigm, because if information is of value and we're all getting it at once, that's messing things up for people that just want the data for them and not getting it out to everyone at once.
Right. We often forget, back in the Middle Ages, people didn't read. Literacy was very low in Europe, so it was very easy to control people by describing the Bible. Of course, very perverse interpretations, in fact, had evolved over time. And then you had the age of general literacy, where you get one newspaper in the early 20th century. One newspaper at your door told you everything about the world. Everything. So you could see, again, how easy it was to control thought back then. Now it's almost the opposite. In fact, it kind of goes almost to a negative point because there's so much information. It's an oversaturation point, which, granted, we wouldn't want it any other way, really. Somehow information that's viable needs to come to the surface, which it does, but it's been flooded by all this nonsense simultaneously that keeps this problem basically in line. Where do we find our sources? It comes down to how we think about things. How do we evaluate information? How do we decide what's valuable, what isn't? Do we base it on our traditionalized notions, going back to that stuff I mentioned earlier?
Yeah.
Or do we try to be objective and scientific? I can't emphasize that word enough, which is the rigor of forcing ourselves to accept the possibility that we're wrong, which is unfortunately so deeply ingrained in us to have this emotion.
Hi, everybody. This is Rick Overton. You're listening to Overview, and I'm going to dive right in with my guest. Peter Joseph is a man whose work I admired for a long time before having met him, and he is the creator of Zeitgeist, a series of films now that deconstruct the actual etymology behind the sources of religious myth and the actual roots behind the economic crises, synthetic as often as they are. He explains why. He's a brilliant man. He's also an artist. He's a musician and a composer. And I believe that the Renaissance occurs when you force a dark age on people. And we live in a very brightly lit dark age right now. And as bad as you think you are, and as tough as you think you are, with all your money, you're not bigger and badder than physics. And when you push a lot of dark on people, you're going to create light manufacturers. And that's what a Renaissance is. I don't wait for light, I manufacture it. And I only did that because of a necessity that you forced upon me when you brought the Dark Age. So I want to thank everyone who was forcing the Dark Age on us to manufacture out of evolution.
Emotional reaction to be wrong. I hate that.
Well, it used to be your merit was what you built, what you made, what you hunted, what you killed, how many soldiers you laid to waste in a field. None of those things really play into the average modern fella's day-to-day stomp around life. And so he's wondering, what's the last thing I got that is my merit, my manhood? It's what I say. I decide things well based on data I've been fed. And all I can hope when I get in the car and no one's looking is that I got fed the right data.
That's right.
And
That's
these
right.
are most everything we're talking about is data wars.
Exactly. What are we? What are we as people? In some sense, we are just kind of conduits of the manifestation of information. I call it the organism of knowledge because it's completely independent of any of us, you know? It's like we talk about authority, we talk about some guy invents this, and, Newton discovers the law of gravity. Not really. He just stumbled upon it, just like every other invention. None of this stuff comes from anybody.
Ben Franklin invented electricity.
Right. That's a whole other subject of deep theft, but we won't go on that tangent. The parasitic culture is alive and well, and it's unfortunate how time moves forward and it gets buried over. But the real fault is, as far as ego, to separate that, the real fault is how people claim it's theirs, which is a huge, unfortunate reality. None of us have invented or come up with anything original ever.
The Western way is you get a plaque on a door.
Right.
Because you were the final guy someone went to for the answers. And all your grant money flows to your wing of a building.
Right.
And the last thing you want to see when you're a quantum theorist is the kid with string theory shows up, because on one level you're the noble scientist staring skyward and knowing that no matter what happens I remove myself from the equation, and science is greater than me. And then you get on the phone and you hear that there's bills and the kid's not making it through college, and suddenly all that stuff goes out the window, and you're just trying to figure out how you can keep your name slid into that thing on your door, and your oak door in your office,
Right.
and you'll throw away science's latest discovery to keep your job.
Yep. I call that establishment paralysis.
I love that.
Because you're establishing your identity, you're making it firm, you're putting this authority behind it. Because it has a monetary quality, you have to use it for survival, and that's one of the greatest things I argue in the Zeitgeist movement stuff is that we have this whole basis of thought around institutions when there's really no such thing as an institution. Everything's emergent and transient. The very idea of having a solid institution, the state, or this entity of academia in whatever field, these notions are very paralyzing and retarding ultimately because it's always a fluid motion of change. But we stop that change, and that's why the corporate establishment, with all of its different tactics of planned obsolescence and the stifling of progress. There's a light bulb in a firehouse in the Midwest that's been burning for over 100 years, made out of a unique technology that no one can figure out. And it's been suppressed, basically. All the patents were destroyed. All the information, was destroyed.
But it's screwed in and just sitting there.
It's been on for over 100 years. And this is it's like a testament to the type of progress we could have with technological application if we didn't have the hindrance of everyone seeking